All right, guys, I'm going to be introducing not Chris. Unfortunately, today, Chris had a bit of a family issue, had to stay home. Instead, I'm going to introduce Leon Blackwell. He's been with the Minemax team for a huge amount of years. He's going to tell you a little bit more in detail, and he's going to be taking us through the presentation about Capex Modeling Redefined here. Thanks.
Hello again. I am still not Chris, but hopefully these are actually the right slides. All right. Okay, so I'll be going over very quickly what we've put in our latest Minemax Scheduler 7.8 release, and also covering a little bit of what we're working on next, or at least the bits that I'm allowed to discuss. So things that are in Minemax Scheduler 7.8, which was released very recently. I'll go through each of these in a little more detail, but we have capital expenditure modeling. We've added several new operational controls for controlling things like vertical rate of advance. We've added a new feature or two to haulage for those people that are using that. We've made several improvements to the user interface and the experience of using Scheduler, and we've added some new reporting and export options. So the first thing, and one of the largest things that we've worked on, is some improvements to capital expenditure modeling. Previously, CapEx was mostly about expanding the maximum constraints that you've defined elsewhere in Scheduler. Now you can apply CapEx to change maximum constraints, minimum constraints, cumulative constraints, difference constraints, and capacity constraints on stockpiles. The interface is pretty simple. You simply choose which kind of constraint you want to be modifying, and then you can either increase or decrease that constraint as part of your CapEx, which gives you quite a lot of modeling potential. So a few simple examples. If you want to expand cumulative constraints, for example, you could use that instead of having a full dump definition or something like that, or for tailing storage. You could simply have a cumulative constraint that you purchase additional cumulative value for to increase the amount of tailings that you could send out using that constraint. You can also expand minimum constraints as well. So if you have things that require a guaranteed throughput as part of that scenario that you're investigating through that capital expenditure, you can increase that minimum. And obviously you can combine these sorts of things. So a single CapEx can expand a minimum, a maximum, a cumulative, or whatever as a combination in a single scenario. Yep. You can also now use CapEx to expand the capacity of stockpiles or stockpile groups. So, for example, here it's expanding the capacity of a ROM group, which would be a whole set of stockpiles. So you've purchased and spent the money to set that up, and now you have additional stockpiling capacity. You can technically also decrease capacity, and you can do things like starting with 0 on a stockpile capacity and then increasing it up to make stockpiles that weren't previously available. So that gives you the facility now to essentially play around with increasing and decreasing any quantity-related constraint that you might have in Minemax Scheduler. Along with that, we've added the facility to defer the cost over multiple periods for the capital expenditures. So when you purchase them, that cost is now not just in one period. That's across any number of periods that you would like. That could be simply deferring it in this example over multiple periods, or you could have that cost be realized after several periods by putting 0 in the first few, or you can have it ahead of the capital being expanded by delaying the actual expansion and having the cost up front. So it gives you a little bit more facility to model what is actually happening in terms of the money that you're spending and where that is being applied in the schedule. Also useful if you're using financial constraints to control your maximum capital expenditure spending and so forth, because now that's actually represented properly. We've also put in, as I said before, some operational constraints. So we've expanded the maximum benches to be per pit group. So you can now have the maximum number of benches mined per period for each individual pit group. You can obviously still have it be fairly simple and constant across everything, but now you can be a little bit more precise about where you're applying that spatial constraint. We've added the ability to specify the minimum mining constraint So if you're mining something, what's the minimum amount that needs to be mined on a per period basis? So if that's something that changes throughout the duration of your schedule, that's much easier to control now. And it's also useful if you have different lengths of periods. So if you start with quarters and then end up to years, obviously the minimum amount that you might want to apply would be different because the length of the period is different. We've added some functionality into haulage, which will allow you to query the distance for the fastest cycle time and not just the fastest cycle time itself, which is very useful if you are trying to calculate costs based on distance traveled, if that's how the haulage is calculated based on your contractor or based on how you want to work it out yourself. So you can now use that as part of your import to derive any sorts of costs or other values that are based on distance that you might be interested in constraining or reporting on. And then we've kind of added a few extra things in there just to make using schedule a little bit nicer. Some people really like to put colors on things. You've always been able to put colors on things. And so now everywhere in the software that you could previously color things, you can now select multiple and apply color gradients. So it's really nice for time periods, for all sorts of different sets of processes, for example. And so then you can use those colors to make your charts, your 3D, and so on look nice and consistent and be a little bit easier to work out what you're looking at within the software. As far as exporting, we now fully support Datamine formats. So we are exporting to the DM format and the new DMX format for those people that are using that. And all of the different tabular reports and schedules are now all exportable to that format throughout the software. We've also, as part of that, added the facility to specifically update Datamine block model files. So where we used to be able to back schedule out to a CSV, you can now essentially back schedule into your existing block model. So you're updating the block model so you don't have to do several steps to get that data back into your block model if you want to take it back to Studio or whatever to work with it and have that information immediately available. So that's actually pretty easy to set up and use. We've also added in a few extra fields for those people that like them. We've added first period mined, last period mined, majority period mined, and the allocated stockpile groups. So you can get that in your schedule exports so that you can see a little bit more detail about what's happening down at the individual block layer. Quite handy if you want to throw that at some cool pivot charts and stuff later. And we've changed the attribute chart and tables so that you can optionally report by quantity rather than just by the grade. So you can sort of see your contained metal quantities for those people who work in those industries. So there's an example there on recovered copper. So you can see the tons of recovered copper instead of just seeing it as a grade, which is quite nice. And we've obviously fixed minor bugs, tidied up a bunch of things and made a bunch of little minor things. There's a few other things in the release notes if you want to have a look. And we're already working on the next version. So what we're looking at over the next year, predominantly at this point, what I can tell you about at least is we're focused on the usability of the software. So we are kind of looking at a key focus of people who have been building larger and larger models as we've been getting bigger and bigger computers and people's lives are getting more and more complicated in what they're trying to work on. The models have got larger, which means the process of building them is more complicated. So we're focused on trying to make that easier for them. And for things like bulk creating process definitions that all kind of look similar because they have the same attributes. And for editing those process definitions, as one person said, they quite often forget one attribute and you don't want to have to go back and add that to several attributes. So we're going to be adding that in there, changing process types. So the idea is essentially allowing it to be bulk edited. Here's a little animation showing something else we've been working on, which is making the process diagram completely drag and drop and user interface friendly. So you don't have to drag it at this speed, obviously, but if you're really fast, it will work.
People are like,
yeah. This speed. People, yeah, it does actually make your life a lot easier. You can just drag things in, drag them, add to the diagram, select things in the diagram and delete them and so on. It will give you some visual feedback that I think is a bit hard to see at this speed of what is and isn't possible to help you build those diagrams. And we're also working on the automatic layout a little bit to sort of hopefully produce slightly nicer looks and a little bit more comprehensible for those people that do have those really, really large process diagrams. For those people who are using Minemax Scheduler Enterprise or want to upgrade to it, if that's the thing that's useful for you, we're going to be adding some improvements that will allow multiple users to work together on projects. So we're going to be introducing a bunch of different multi-user edit modes, which will include an exclusive mode, which is kind of how it's been working now, where one user will get access to that project, except now it will properly communicate really nicely that that project is locked. And no one else should be looking at it except in read-only mode with Scheduler Viewer, or with an enterprise license, you can open it in read-only mode. Partial, which will allow people to load and lock individual scenarios. So that will allow one person to be working on one scenario, another person to be working on another scenario, or potentially the batch optimizer to be optimizing one scenario while you're working on another one, so you don't have to worry about any of those collisions that might have occurred previously. And you can also just choose to open a project in read-only mode, sort of like you had Scheduler Viewer, so you're not locking that project down and stopping other people from doing any work. We're also, for Scheduler Enterprise, going to be enabling 2 simultaneous optimizations, because people's computers have got a bit more powerful, and we found that that seems to work reasonably well without slowing people's computers down too much. So you'll be able to run 2 at once. So you can start up a scenario, start working on another one, optimize that one, start working on a third. And so hopefully you'll be able to sort of turn around your day-to-day jobs a little bit easier using that. We're going to be adding in some other features, obviously, not just for usability. We're going to be working on stockpile degradation. So when you put material on a stockpile, you'll be able to describe what happens to the qualities of that material over time, because obviously your grades alter if you leave the material sitting on there and exposed and oxidizes over a number of years, for example. And we're going to be building in some reserves analysis. So when you import your data, we're going to be providing some facilities so that you can more easily validate and confirm that you've imported the data, that it looks correct, and also investigate the reblocking that you've made to sort of have a look at the distribution of material and make sure that you've set that all up correctly and you have reasonable distributions that match where your approximate cutoffs are going to be, so that Scheduler can make the best decisions during optimization. And obviously, all of this stuff came from feedback from users, because we want to make the software work really well for other people. So we really want everyone else to have their say. So some people might not be aware, but we've more recently in the last year or so launched an ideas portal. Anybody can join. There's a QR code you can scan right now, or you can pester us later on support or contact us directly and we'll send you an invite. You can throw ideas in there. You can tell us what you hate about the software. You can vote on other ideas that people have, and then we can use that to help kind of guide what we do, because obviously Scheduler is a big product and we really want to make something that's going to make everyone's lives as happy as possible. You'll also be able to have a little bit of an insight as to what's coming, because we put up there what we're planning to work on for the next release, sometimes the release after that, and you can tell us if you think we're wrong. That's great. I like to hear that I'm wrong. So that's kind of a very, very high-speed version of what we've been working on and what we're working on next. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them now or later.
All right, Leon, thank you very much.
Thank you.